May this sharing be really what the people here need today. May I be guided to say it in a way that lands for somebody just what they need today. May my story come through to be of service to our greater collective well-being and health. So now I'm going to try again on the technology now that I can press escape. All right, so I'm going to do screen share. And this. And there's one more thing I need to press. Can you see my screen?
Yes, now it's come up.
Yes. Okay, great. And then I press
the song of the one.
Okay. Great. Yay. All right. So I'm going to share about my near-death experience and the context for it. So I was 8 years old, and it was 1977, so post-Vietnam War, very recent. And I was growing up on the East Coast, actually Delaware, and a lot of my relatives are from Virginia. So that's some of my East Coast context. And ideally, our parents have been treated well, and therefore they have that proper instinct to protect their children. And so that hadn't happened for my parents. So I wasn't being protected, and that made me vulnerable to being exposed to other adults who weren't safe. And one of those unsafe adults chose to abduct me. And he was military, and I think kind of on his own volition, not part of any military thing. He maybe saw an advertisement in the Soldier of Fortune magazine. I'm going to forward. So this is me at 8 years old. And so I believe he saw an advertisement in Soldier of Fortune magazine. And it was the Rhodesian War was going on. And they were recruiting, the white government was recruiting for more soldiers to fight their side. So this was literally an ad in that magazine that if you didn't even have money, you could be in Rhodesia fighting within a month. And so it is possible that he saw that advertisement, and in his confused mind, he chose to abduct me and take me with him. So this is where Rhodesia was, which is now called Zimbabwe. So it's above South Africa, next to Botswana. And so I was taken to Bulawayo at first, and I have gone back since and actually found the reserve where I was taken. And so when he abducted me, he drugged me, so I can't know exactly as far as the transport. The best I can put together is he took me to the Philadelphia airport, the closest international airport. And I can't know exactly how he transported me. But the research I've done tells that it's far easier to abduct a child out of the country, especially in 1977. This was even before most states had child protective services. There wasn't even a system to report abducted children established in the government yet. And we're used to a lot of protection that we have now for children in place. And again, in 1977, some of this was just being established, but in a lot of states, they didn't even have any system to really track missing children. So he drugged me, and it's possible that he just took me on as a sleeping child. I'm not really sure. I woke up and I was in his quarters in a barracks in a training facility. And since I've gone back, I've found that since he was a foreign recruit, I found the place where he was, and I went back and it looked familiar. And my life was in danger. He was extremely mentally not well and violent, and really had no ability to see another human being in terms of a sociopathic level. And the one time I defied him, he assaulted me and kicked me and broke my ribs. And I thought this was going to be the end of my life. And that until this point, it had really been a miserable 8 years. And so I thought, this is where I'm going to get to go home to these visions that I see of colors and images and spirals. And that, to me, that was heaven so far. And so this drawing I did is kind of me desiring to lift off and go through that portal that's in the upper corner. But that's not what happened. And the angel came and she told me, it's not your time and you're here to stay. And I thought, I want a new angel. That's not the news I want. I want to be able to go. I want to be able to leave. I want to be able to go back to some place that's a gentler, kinder place. So the MPs came and got me and took me to a hospital. And again, I was able to go back, and I found this exact hospital, the children's ward, and that this was actually the bed that I was in. And it was an incredible privilege to be able to go back and to find this. I never expected to find this place in this bed. And I squatted down and kind of looked from the pillow version, and it was exactly as I remembered. So he came and took me out of that hospital. Nobody stopped him. Again, 1977, child welfare was not on really the radar that it is now. And he took me transported me to a market. And in that market, he handed me off to another man. I don't know the nature of the arrangement. It was a black man. People have told me it's extremely unlikely that a black man would have paid for a white child, because that would have been incredibly risky for him to have been caught with a white child. It's possible that the abductor paid him to take me, maybe to lose me in the bush. I can't really know the nature of their arrangement. So this is a modern version of the bus that I would have been taken on. This is a much nicer, much more modern one, and but it was very full, even had animals on it. I was, of course, the only white person on this bus. And the bus broke down, and we were all instructed to get out and walk. And so I'm newly out of the hospital. My ribs are broken. I can't keep up. And so the man that I had been given to, he kind of pushed me to move along, and he pushed on my ribs that were just freshly broken ribs. So I bit him. And he kind of pulled away from me like, oh, what is this child, that's biting me? I'm just going to leave her behind. And so everybody else moved on. And I just was so defeated at that point that I just sat down and just waited to die. And I thought, no, this is how my life is going to end. So I just sat waiting to, basically die of dehydration. But this is what happened next. A truck full of armed soldiers came along, and I thought, now this is how I'm going to die, and it's going to be much faster. And what ended up happening is, instead of shooting me, that they got down and one of them picked me up and put me on the back of the truck. And I had no idea what their plans were. Of course, none of them spoke English, but they weren't harming me. And what they were doing was transporting me. And I didn't know whether they were transporting me to another place to end my life or what was going to happen next. And what I know now from my second return trip, they took me back to one of the places that was really the most dangerous soldiers, and that I was taken to a place in the Thule block that I've been told even armed white soldiers didn't go in. People were literally running out of their houses, running for their lives. And what happened is that two soldiers had an argument over me. One clearly wanted to end my life, and one was arguing for my life as an innocent child. And again, all of this is not in English, but I can tell the tone. And the stress level at this point for me was so intense that I just collapsed. And when I woke up, one of the men who was arguing for my life, that I now know his name is Luca, he transported me to a village. And so he took me out of there. He took the risk to transport me, which used fuel, which is a precious, precious thing. And he was going against his comrades. And what I've learned about this war is that, one, it's incredibly complex. There's several sides, and people were shifting sides. People were shifting loyalties. Brothers would join different sides. And so it was incredibly dangerous to even talk about kind of where your loyalties lay. And so for him to do that, to risk his life, risk his position, to save me, a child he didn't even know. And essentially, I have the enemy to thank for my life, because he was part of the, depending on your political perspective, he was part of the guerrilla soldiers, the most extreme faction. So he took me close to the border to South Africa. So the Limpopo River divides what was then Rhodesia and South Africa. And he dropped me off at a village and basically said, kind of pointed and in his language said, "Go there, little girl." And it was, so I just looked around after he drove away, and it was getting dark and I could hear barking dogs. And I thought, they sound really scary and I don't want to go there and, encounter barking dogs. So I found a tree to hide in, and I spent the night in that tree. And so in the morning, I went towards the huts because I could hear singing. And the singing that I do is different than the singing that the women do. But I'm listening to they taught me how to listen to the song in the land. And so that's why it's different than if I had stayed there with them. So I'm listening to the song in the land here where I live now. But it was something kind of has the same essence as and I wanted to know what these women were singing about, what moved their hearts to make these rich sounds. And so I kind of went closer to the sounds, and they were grinding food and they were grinding corn. And there I saw two women, and I wanted to be closer to what made them sing with this joy. And so this is my drawing to honor one of the women who became like a mother to me. And I didn't know it then, but my world was going to rest on her back. So I did this drawing to honor her. And there's the creation story, the Native American creation story, that the world rests on the back of a turtle. And so my world was going to rest on her back. And so I got closer, and they saw me, and they kind of thought, wow, why are there, wondering why there's a white child here. And there was only one white family nearby, the Bristows. And so they brought me food and they brought me water. And I kind of slowly came out and I ate all the food and I drank the water. But I was very, very defended child, very self-protective. And it wasn't until the next day that I let the children gathered around me, and they were touching my white skin and touching my hair that was more blonde then. And I let them I let them touch me, and I let them take me to the ceremony circle where there was black ash. And the elder girl started just telling a story, and she was holding me by the wrist, and she had the ash, and she was putting black ash on my skin, and she was telling this story, and I began to gather, and it was in Venda, so I obviously couldn't understand it, but I got the essence that it was a story about how I arrived to them, and it was, and she was kind of saying, you know, as best as I could gather, she came from out there and she came to us. And the other children started to put black ash on me, and they were making me more like them and making it so I belonged. For the first time in my life, I had a sense of belonging. And when she was done her story, the children ran off, and this other woman that I call Mamiatan, she came over and she began to call me to her. And when she called me to her, she was singing, I am ho, 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 ho. And so I got closer to her, and I could sense that she was filled up on the inside. And if I stayed with her, then it would help fill me up too. And I wouldn't be so hollow as I was, so worn down, so broken. And so she continued to sing to me, and she gathered me in, and I ended up just collapsing in her arms. And when I looked in her face, it was the first time that I saw the eyes of a mother. And I let her be my shelter, and I let her be my adult that gathered me in. So I was with them, and they began to teach me their songs, and I began to learn how to grind the corn and plant in the field. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't really understand that there was a war going on. Like, I obviously knew it was a dangerous place. But one day I wandered too far, and I wandered to the river where the women had taken me and put clay on my big bruise from where he had kicked me. And I had gotten used to, you know, some of the adults who protected me. So this drawing is the drawing of one of the men that I call Atto, who was like a kind of like a father figure to me. And again, I did this drawing to honor him. So I wandered to this creek where it had been a good experience for me as far as the women putting the clay on me. And I kind of, you know, was a curious kid, and I'd followed a snake there. And when that snake went off, I didn't know. Good thing I didn't understand, like, that it was probably a poisonous snake and the variety of snakes that were there. I think I just got lucky. And so as I was there, kind of at the creek, I didn't know that right next to me, in the field nearby, that soldiers were gathering and a battle was going to happen, and that two sides were going to have a battle. And one of those soldiers spotted me, and I was too far from the village. And as soon as he spotted me, he rose up his gun. And when his gun became just a circle, I knew that there was no hope for me. But I had just started to turn to run when I could hear his gun go off. And the bullet grazed the top of my head, and the intensity blew me off my feet. And I went down to the ground, and I vomited. And I began to have my life force leave my body. It was pulsing in and out of me. And I was viewing myself as I was above. And I was looking down, and I was watching my body go like a blackout, a city in blackout, like the life force and the vitality was leaving. And I thought, if I don't have that life force come back in and reside in me, then that's going to be the end of me. And what happened next is that my life force and the perspective of myself looking down from above all of a sudden went through my body, through my heart, and out the back of my heart. And I began a very fast journey, and I was traveling. And when I arrived, I was in a place that was brilliant light. And there was 2 sisters there that were greeting me. And I knew if I went with them that I could go home to my original source. But I thought, oh, but I just found family and they named me Aisha and I had a naming ceremony and I don't want to lose my newfound family. And so I started grasping. And this grasping for my newfound family, my human family, sent me backwards. And I fell backwards and backwards ever so gently. And I landed in this place that was kind of like, maybe Ireland on a kind of cold, cloudy day. And there was this old stairwell. And I fell to the bottom of this stairwell. And the steps were worn down like many, many people had walked down these stairs. And I didn't know where I was. I thought, I wish I had it back like it was before when I was in this brilliant light with my 2 sisters. So I looked around and I was trying to stand up, but I was so weak. And this man appeared next to me, and he seemed old and rickety, and he was offering his hand for me to stand up with him. And I thought, well, I don't want his help. I just want to be able to stand up on my own. But when I tried to stand up, the walls were slimy with kind of moisture and moss. And so I ended up needing his help to get up. And so he gestured that we should walk down these steps, walk down. And he seemed to know what we were doing, and I didn't know what to do. So I started walking down these steps with him. But there was something dripping on my shoulder, and I put my hand on it to see what it was. And it was my own blood. And I showed it to him, and I was panicked. And he kind of nodded his head like he knew, like that meant even more we should go down these stairs. But it was this dark cave we were entering into. And I thought, I don't know about this. I think I had it better before. But he kept gesturing, like, come with me. We're going to go into here. So I went into this dark cave with him. And there was kind of all the shadow of what I was avoiding. And it was all the adults who had perpetrated, all the sexual abusers, all the really scary adults who had really made my first 8 years totally miserable. And I had my hand in his, and he was guiding me through kind of like their faces coming to me as ghosts. And I was hearing all my own screams that I had repressed and hadn't let out. And it was horrible, but he was with me. And then for one moment, I could see as he sees. And I saw my fear, but I also saw that there was nothing to fix about me. There was nothing wrong with me. And there was nothing bad about me that was making adults abuse me. That the confusion was in them. And that I was fine. And that he wasn't trying to fix me. He was just guiding me. And when I understood that I was fine, that there was nothing bad about me, nothing wrong about me, that there was no seed in me that was bringing on the abuse, then the screaming stopped and the ghost stopped, and we were able to proceed through the cave. And we came out the other side, and I looked up at the night sky, and it was like the stars were living relatives. This beautiful, like the sky and the stars and the colors were like I had never experienced before. And we were standing on the edge of a cliff. And I put my hands in his. And my trust in him was absolute. That wherever he was going to lead me, I was going to follow. And I said to him in my mind, telepathically, we didn't need words, where are we going next? And he nodded his head that we were going to just jump off this cliff together. And I said, okay. And when we did, we were like birds falling in the night sky. And I suddenly realized that he was like a bodhisattva, a being who was so generous. He could go anywhere, but he chose to come help me through my dark cave. And we floated down through this night sky into sunrise. And kind of in this morning sky, he parted paths from mine, and there was kind of this glowing sphere. And again, he kind of said to me, like, go there, that's original source to home. And when he left, I had some of the same strength inside that was inside him, now inside me. And he gave me a gift that I couldn't even comprehend. What was going to be the seed for me of some of the healing work that I do with other people. And he lent me some of his presence so that I could give that kindness, that loving presence, that you are okay, that there is nothing wrong with you, that I now use in my healing. And so I could have flown on to that golden glowing sphere, to that original source. But I thought, oh, I want to tell my African family everything that's happened so far. I want to let them know all about this man in the cave that I met. And so I started looking for them. And that guided me to land down in this field. And I didn't go into the golden glowing sphere. I landed down into this field of grass. And when I landed, I got scared. What if my African family is hurt? What if they're fallen down? What if they've been harmed and I need to help them? And so I started running around all over. And the more distressed I got, the more the grass grew up. And I was lost in this tall, tall field of grass. And I suddenly got so afraid that they'd been harmed and that I would lose them all. And I fell down in the grass and I sobbed until I was like a storm cleared out. And when I was done my sobbing and I sat up and I heard a rustling in the grass and I went towards that. And I saw a man, and his face, he had a beard and he had a robe and he had a sheep herder staff. And when I stood in his presence, I could remember no disturbance. I ran to him hoping he would have instructions of how I could get back to my newfound African family. But in his presence, there was nothing else to long for. There was nothing to grasp for. And I looked into his face, and his face began to change. And it changed into somebody else and another person's face. And then his face changed into a lion. And at first I was confused. Why is this being so dynamic? Why does his face change? And I wanted him to stay the same and predictable. But he was showing me it's not the form that matters. It's the presence. And then he leaned his head and touched his forehead to mine. And I could see, as he sees, that we are all connected and that each one of us is a gem, a living gem. And we are connected in this extraordinary matrix of living lines. And it is our love and our focus that creates these living lines of connection. And I could see all the universe, every mountain, every river, every person, animal, creature, insect is all interconnected in this living matrix. And then he came back from touching my forehead. And when he rose up and stood up, I realized even if I lose my African family, I belong to this interconnected web of life. And that will always be with me. I just have to remember that I'm that interconnected. And when he rose up, and I asked, where are we going next? And I just merged myself into him, and through him I knew I could go home to my original source. And so I merged my being into his, and we went through a tunnel of light again. And we came out and we were hovering above my body. And now my Mami Atan had found me, and she had pulled my limp body up onto her lap, and she had her hand pressing on my head, and she was stopping the blood flow. And she was wailing. And I wanted to tell her, I am okay. I am just fine. I am totally held with my guides, and I am not in pain. She was wailing, and I began to lift off further. And this drawing represents the little turtle is like when I still had physical form. And it was like I was taking off this, leaving behind a suit of my human form. And I was rising up into this place that was entirely interconnected, that what I thought would become, that each time I became curious to connect, that I had this freedom, this openness to connect everywhere. And at the top of this drawing, you can see that free form of wings that's got these ever-connected ripples going out. And when I was drawing it, there was those two red lines that I thought maybe was my head wound, but I began to realize it was mitosis, it was cell division. And that each time I try to draw my death, I draw birth, I draw creation, that the new formation of something else that becomes possible. And I crossed through the veil that was like going into a secret garden. Like these veils opened up and I went through. And I was going back to my original form. I was getting younger and purified. And all the trauma from the abuse, from not belonging, was lifting off me. And I was going back home to being the seed syllable, the great heart that sung me into being. And so this drawing is that purity, that pure essence, and that belonging in the universe. And I continued into this tunnel of light. And here I've drawn myself as an owl, which I hadn't researched yet, that is often in many cultures a symbol of death. And so I was going home to the light, to the original source. And I was totally guided through this tunnel, that there was no way I could get lost, that it was totally pure, and I was continuing. The further I went in towards the light, the more I was being purified. And ahead of me was the whole universe. And so in my own eyes is reflected all of the belonging, all of those gems, all of that interconnection. And I was just growing greater and greater sense of what it would be like again to reunite, to become again part of the Great Heart. And what happened is that I began to hear singing. And it was my Mami Atan, my African mother. She had changed her wailing into singing, and it was a calling song. And she had called on the ancestors in the land to call me through the veil to where I was. And so this drawing represents me as the owl, and the kind of orange spiral at the top is her. And she's singing her song, which is the ribbon. It has come through the veil to touch me, and that my talons touch this song. And when this song touches me, I remember that I am a medicine singer like her, and that I haven't yet done my purpose. And that my calling is to go back and return so I can sing to others to help them remember their belonging, their wholeness, their potential to heal, their resilience, just as she is doing for me. And when I turn around, I have to remember that I belong to the Great Heart and bring that back with me. So this is me now as a falcon I'm returning back to that original veil that has reopened for me back into this physical dimension. And the hands at the bottom are my Mami Atan's hand ready to receive me. And before I crossed back over, I met kind of the gatekeeper at that final veil. And to me, she was the great, great grandmother of all of us, the grandmother of all races. And her skin was brown and her eyes could change to all colors. And she was singing to me and she was helping remember that belonging inside my heart. And she was singing to me like I was a cathedral, and she was singing a song of praise inside me. And she was telling me it's going to be so difficult when you go back, but we are giving you gifts so you can make it through that difficulty. And we are giving you art, and we are giving you vision, and we are giving you this singing so that you can make it through. And we're going to keep that art inside you like a treasure so that once you are safe, you can allow these visions of art to come through you and help others remember the collective wisdom. So again, this is the veil opening and me returning back to physical form. And so I came back to my physical body, and the pain returned, and the village kind of came and was holding me, and they took me back to the huts and put medicine on me, and they sang to me to get the hatred from the bullet off my head so I wouldn't be confused by that hatred and do something like seek revenge or be a vengeful person. And so their singing to get that hatred off my head allowed me to purify and remember their love and that I was held. And what happened is that they took care of me, and about 2 days later, as best as I can put together, sadly the soldiers came back and they attacked the village. And one of the other mothers, who was again one of the mothers that sang to me and put the clay on me, she gathered me up on her hip and we were running to escape. And while we were running, she was running and holding me. She was shot from behind and we both went down. And when I recovered from the shock of hitting the ground and I stood up, and she was yelling at me. She was still alive but bleeding, and she was yelling at me to run. And I wanted to be able to have the strength and the power to pull her with me. But I had just been shot myself. I had died of blood loss. I was very weak. This was like the first I was up. And she was just yelling at me to run, and she had never yelled at me before. So I followed her instructions and I ran. And I made it about, maybe 15 or 20 feet, and I was running down a slight hill. And the weakness and my blood maybe started bleeding again. And I fell downward on this hill. And again, I've had the privilege to go back and find that place. And I crossed over again, and it was a very different experience. And I was in a field of white, and there was a voice singing to me. And the song was, "You will live, you will live." And it was the song to Three Blind Mice, which was a very positive association for me, because the kindest thing my brother ever did for me was when I was sick, he read me all 3 books of the Three Blind Mice. So hearing that lyric, that tune, I trusted who was ever singing to me. And I thought, have I died again? And I looked around and everything was white and I had no sense of body. And And I was hearing the song, "You Will Live." And I thought, oh, maybe that's just instructions to me that there's something that's hopeful here. And so I was moved closer to the source that was singing this song, and I could see a veil. And I was trying to look through the veil, but I couldn't see it. But what I could see was a record. And this, whatever was singing to me, was showing me the song was done, and it was showing me the record that had been singing the song. And I could see that the record was very scratched. I had a deep scratch in it. And I thought, this record needs to be thrown away. And the voice said to me, the scratches are how I find your uniqueness, how I know it's you, and that we do not throw out things that are damaged, that we honor the places that you've been broken open, because you have been broken open to become strong at those places. And that some of us know about the potter who breaks the pottery and fills in the cracks with gold. And that you will be filled in, your cracks, your broken places will be filled in with gold. And that there is meaning in this suffering. And he showed me a scene, he gave me a vision of land, of plain, where there was like animals and plants. And this plain began being crushed into, one plane was crushed into the other. And the land plates were gliding across each other, and it was destructive. But in the end of all that destruction, a beautiful mountain was formed. And then, that mountain had life and plants and animals and trees. But even that began to erode. And the grain by grain, slide by slide, the mountain was coming down, and it was making the beaches. And he said, shall we bring down the mountain so you can have the beaches? And I said, I like both. I don't like the destruction part. I just want the beauty. I want the mountain and the beaches. And he said, you cannot understand in your short human lifetime that destruction makes available the ingredients for new creation. It is the mountain that makes the beaches, and that we must bring it down grain by grain to make the sand. And I said, I don't like the destruction part. And he said, of course, from your human perspective, it doesn't make sense. And in that moment, I said, I will remember. And he said, when you go back, you will forget. But I will hold that this destruction has meaning. And he was referring to the loss of the people from my community, that they had been massacred. And that someday I would understand that there was meaning in this and meaning in my survival. So I came back, and this is my drawing of kind of crossing through that portal, that the butterfly is going through that portal into death. And in that moment, it may not make sense to us, but we are still belonging to something greater. And this is my drawing of that, I believe, the woman who fell down, Mama Naisha, that this is her crossing, that she was the turtle that held me, and I again was the little turtle held by her. And through her generosity, through her help, I did get to survive. And that, as far as I know, I may be only one of the survivors from that attack. And maybe someday I will find others, but that's the best I know right now. So this is my drawing. I'm the little turtle, and she's the big turtle that held me. And this is her crossing over. And so this is the land. This is, one side is South Africa, and one side is what's now Zimbabwe. And this happens to be a crux point where Botswana is very close. So I wanted to give you all a sense of where all this took place. And so when I came back, what I call the god of mountains become beaches, who I also believe was Shiva, the Hindu god of creation and destruction. He instructed me to crawl towards the well, and it was his strength that funded me to crawl towards the well. And in the morning, I was found by a woman, Mia Lucy, and she put me on her back and she took me back to her homestead and she hid me. And she had the local healer come and help me. And they put, I don't remember this, but I've been told they put a shoe polish on me to hide me because it was incredibly dangerous for her to have a white child. And when people saw that she had a wounded white child, they said, it's too dangerous. Just don't bother with her. And she said, she's a living human being. I won't throw her away. And it is her courage as to why I'm alive today. And it is her service to me that allows me to be of service to others. And so they asked around to the closest white people who were in South Africa across the river, and they said, we found this white child. What should we do with her? And they said, give her to us. We'll find her family. And they didn't know that I was American and that they weren't going to find my family in Zimbabwe or South Africa. And so they went, there was a fence between what was then Rhodesia and now South Africa because they were trying to keep the war out. So this is the fence that they took me through. And then on the other side, they gave me to the white family, the white farming family. And so they were Afrikaners and they spoke Afrikaans, which is a kind of a modified Dutch. And I could understand them less because they didn't have as much facial expression and gesture as much. So when I was with the people on the other side, the Black Africans, while they spoke Venda, I couldn't know them spoke English. There was like a body language and I understood them more. And so I crossed over to this other side and I wasn't getting the same touch. I wasn't being sung to. And I felt like I was a burden. Like this was a farming family. They had things to do and I felt like I was a burden. And I just began to die. You know, maybe I had infection, but I began to die again. And I just crawled behind the refrigerator, which was kind of like the refrigerator hummed. So it was kind of like my seeking of something that had vibration. And so they found me behind the refrigerator and took me to the hospital. And I was given antibiotics. And so this is the second hospital in Petersburg, South Africa. And again, I've had the privilege to go back and I actually even found the third floor bed, the ward that I was in and the bed that I was in, the room that I was in. And part of what helps me in my research is that there isn't obviously a lot of money in Africa, so things don't get remodeled. So they're just as they were 40 years ago. So the IV stand was in the same place, the nurse's station was in the exact same place. And we talked to the nurses there and they said, yes, in 1977, this would have been the whites only wing at the hospital. This is apartheid time period. And so they said, this would have been whites only. So this is where you would have been. This was the children's ward then. And I could identify before we went in to visit this, I drew it all out on a piece of paper. And when we went in, it exactly matched. And I just have to say the power of being able to go back and find these places was beyond any therapy session I could ever do. The reclaiming of being able to find all these places, I really have no words for what that put back inside me. And so in this hospital, I was even more isolated. You know, they were doing their best to medically care for me, but nobody was touching me or giving me affection. They intimidated me to tell them like kind of who my my American family was. And so they were contacted and I don't have privy to those details, but it was arranged that somebody did guardianship of kind of taking me back on an airplane ride. And I was returned back to my American family. So this drawing is really about having to kind of go underground. In Africa, there's a bullfrog that can go underground and survive 2 years in hibernation without any water or food. So this is really my drawing of going underground, going under the tree of life. The frogs at the top are the ancestors who sang me back to life. But I just had to go deep inside I had to repress everything. I had to put away. When I woke up in my house back in America and just remembered the girl, I had to be there, and I had to put away the singing. I had to put away the ceremony. I had to put away being loved and loving Black people, because my family was very racist. And when I tried to speak of it, and I might have said something inflammatory, like I have to get back to my real mother, to my mother, she hit me across the face, and I crawled under the bed and just remembered I have to not be what I was there. I can no longer be Aisha. I have to be the shell of the girl that can survive in this family. And so it was many years. I survived a lot more years of abuse through my rest of my childhood and my teen years. And it was when I left for college that I began to, the nightmares started coming through, the body reactions started coming through, both the abuse I survived in America. And I couldn't even allow myself to remember. I had so doubly repressed everything that happened. The abduction, the being taken to Zimbabwe. But here I want to give you a little bit of the map. So Bulawayo at the top is where I was first taken, and then I was transported down to Hawaii, and then Tule Block, and then kind of the close-up where it says Village 16 is right on the border where I was taken, and then Polokwane is the hospital in South Africa. So just to give you a little bit of context. And this is kind of close in, Village 16. John, who, my former husband, who so helped me with all of this amazing research. He has helped me write my book. He helped me find everything. He was an incredible support for me on my trips. And so he actually found this map that had the black dots where the wells were for the villages. So it's literally kind of right on the Limpopo. And where it says store across in the white area is South Africa. And so that's where I was taken to the nearest white family. So this is when I went back and I had my reunion with Maiamu, who's the granddaughter of Mia Lucy. And so she remembers me, and she was part of the people who saved my life. And she just took me in like this sister that, like we had never parted, and it was extraordinary. And I'm gonna see if I can run the video.
Hello. Oh. Oh.
Sorry. So this was a chance meeting on the donkey. Aisha, sorry.
Oh.
Sorry.
Mm.
And here she's checking my bullet wounds.
Sorry. We're done. Yeah, this is John.
Hello.
This is
Can I give you a hug?
Hello, John. These are really old friends. And on this other side here too. There we go. This is very real for Robin right now. Chance meeting. I don't know. This is just more than chance. I don't know. Are you happy, Mayam?
I'm very happy. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was 40 years we hadn't seen each other. And as best she knew, she had kind of word had gotten back somehow that I'd gone back to America and died, which is very interesting since I had put Aisha so deeply down inside myself that energetically, it would be the sense that I had died. And so this is the moments afterwards. And so that really was like what Vanessa was saying, it's a chance meeting, that we were just driving in. We hadn't arranged that, and that the universe arranged that. We were just driving in. We didn't know actually when we were going to directly meet up with my Anmo, but she was driving out when we were, or riding out with the donkey cart when we were driving in. So the universe totally arranged that. We had just literally, we're just arriving. We hadn't even gotten to Vanessa's house yet, who was our host. And so we went a little bit further, and that was the first validation I'd had by another human being in my entire life. My family completely invalidated. They never talked about, they never asked me anything about the abduction. They never asked me like where I was taken. They never asked me anything. And so that's part of another reason why I repressed it so much. And so we went a little bit further in the car and kind of knew that we would come back and meet with my Emma another time. And I just came undone. I just started sobbing, and just my whole biology was like totally transformed, because I had, especially we'd told no one where the bullet wound was, and on purpose. And so for her to check the exact right spot just was confirmation beyond confirmation. So this is, we got out of the car because I was sobbing so hard, and I just really wanted to get across my experience to John, and Vanessa was clever enough to catch it on her camera.
And you're inside my world now. And it's not words anymore. You saw our love. And you know now. And I've been trying to say it, and now you know.
Yeah.
And just that way she held me and just took me in right away. And like no time had passed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's real. It's been living inside me for so long. And now it's outside me too.
Yeah.
And it's this grass and the black stones and these trees and this land and her and these people. And it's not all inside me. It's out here. And I'm going to heal in a way I've never known. And you helped me. I don't have to just keep it alive inside me, because it's alive here. I've not known this feeling before. I've had to keep it alive inside me. And now it's so much bigger than me. It's so much bigger than me. And you saw it. You saw it.
So I'm just pausing. That moves me every time to watch it. And just getting to go back and be there on the land and find every location and reunite with my Anmu was just, again, I can't even describe the healing that happened. And the incredible thing that I really want to get across too is about, we have resilience. It doesn't always show up right at the time of crisis or the time of hardship, but this is this generation of children, and they danced. Like, there wasn't really, like, Vanessa was just beating her hand on the vehicle, and they were dancing, and they were having such a good time. And again, here's another video that I hope I can share. So this is right above where I was shot. This is the hill above where I was shot. So there's the Limpopo River behind me. And to one side is where the battle was, and to the other side is where the village was.
I'm just amazed how neutral it feels to me. It's just the past. After 2 decades of therapy and trauma resolution.
Maybe this was the best trauma resolution yet.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Finding place, having what's happening inside me land here and get validated externally is, you're right, it's the best trauma resolution I've had.
Mm.
And I'm not sure I would be at so much peace if I hadn't done 2 decades of work.
You may not have been ready to come here.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the key. And that life has gone on here. Like this, the war happened and it was tragic and people died. And life has gone on.
So, like I said, I've been working on my book for 11 years, and it is, I'm going to do like one more little edit and then send out my query letters and get an agent and get a publisher. And then you all will be able to get it at some point. And I really look forward to that because, you know, what I've been able to write and record in the book, you know, it's just an incredible amount of detail kind of inside. All right, so